Thanks for your patience, everyone, especially our speaker. We're very pleased to have with us for our final talk of the year, David Wilts, who is from ACOG Ventures and Woodlawn Central. David works at the intersection of urban regeneration, inclusive real estate development, and technology. His current projects include Woodlawn Central. Woodlawn Central development is with Apostolic Church of God. He also works on Cytopia, a new STEAM interactive museum planned in Washington Park, which is affiliated with Paul Serrano, UC faculty member. His other recent projects include National Landing, winner of the Amazon HQ2 in Northeastern Virginia, as well as Downsview Lands, a 35,000 unit housing, 12 district mixed use development of Bombardier's former airport in Toronto. He is also a global leader in digital and smart building, innovation districts, and digital development. David is vice chair of the Technology and Real Estate Council with the Urban Land Institute. Without further ado, because we've had lots of ado, David, the floor is yours.
Thanks, everybody. I'm going to stay close to the laptop here so the far end can see the camera because we're using the camera from my laptop. I'd like to thank Chris and the Mansueto Center for inviting me to share our project here today. And I'd also like to thank the church and Pastor Brazier and Jay Byron Brazier, who brought me into this project. And it's a challenge like none other, and I relish it, and I really appreciate the opportunity to work with the Woodlawn community to try to realize this very, very ambitious project. So without further ado, if you can hold all the questions till the end, that would be appreciated. I'm going to fire hose you with information. We're going to go very quickly to try to make up time. But I'm also happy to stay as long as necessary today. Hi, Tiffany. And answer any and all questions, and also any and all critiques. Welcome to receive them, because what we're trying to do is create something that has not yet been done. And I look forward to following up with anyone who's interested as we go on. So today's thesis is Chicago is in a crisis due to multiple historical and economic challenges. A new approach for inclusive economic growth without displacement is possible with better community, public sector, and private sector alignment. The pent-up economic forces can enable the city to thrive in an abundant economy. And if we are unable to build Woodlawn Central, it will be a very poor reflection on the city of Chicago. So I'm going to cover and provide an overview of the project for everyone. I'm going to cut it shorter in the interest of time, but it'll cover all the salient points. And then I'm going to share some of the biggest challenges the project faces. And then I'm going to share some of the industry and policy solutions we're exploring to overcome the challenges. This quote from Bucky Fuller is one we love. You can never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. That is our aspiration. However, the reality, I'm going to read this out loud. We must bear in mind then that there is nothing more difficult and dangerous or more doubtful of success than an attempt to introduce a new order of things in any state or city. For the innovator has for enemies all those who derived advantages from the old order of things, whilst those who expect to be benefited by the new institutions will be but lukewarm defenders. This indifference arises in part from fear of their adversaries, who are favored by the existing laws, and partially from the incredulity of men who have no faith in anything new that is not the result of well-established experience. We could talk on this slide for the rest of the time, but I will proceed. So, one of the interesting things, this is tracking the Great Migration North. And this is the number of people moving up to Chicago via the Illinois Central Railroad, just a couple blocks over. And as you can see, there were a lot of people getting off the train at 63rd Street and other stops. And then when you look at the population growth, it clearly peaked in the 60s at over 80,000 people. And ever since then, due to disinvestment and all these other forces, especially the intrinsic institutionalized racism in the system of development, it just declines. The Apostolic Church of God is an anchor institution for the South Side of Chicago, and I'm sharing this for context in case people online or in the room aren't familiar with the Apostolic Church. Bishop Brazier became pastor of the church in 1961 and formed the Woodlawn organization to successfully stop racist urban renewal, sponsored in part by the University of Chicago. So the University of Chicago was one of the biggest proponents of racial covenants and actually went and visited other universities to show them their playbook of how to repeat it. And one of the techniques that was being floated in 1961 was to build an expressway and continue Lakeshore Drive around, actually right where this building is, and cut off the midway from the Woodlawn neighborhood, wiping out all the houses and everything along this path. And the church, with Bishop Brazier's leadership, was able to stop this project from happening, and he worked closely with other leaders in the community. In the 70s, Bishop Brazier wrote a book called Black Self-Determination with 3 key tenets: community empowerment through self-determination, the role of faith in social justice, and my comment is making good trouble, and strategic activism in urban development. So some historical context: we're right near where the Columbian Exposition was in 1983. I just turned the map a little to line it up with the map. And this is where the park is now. And we can also see where our project is located. So the Obama Center is here in this construction area that we see on the screen here. Is this working? Yes, it is. And I will forego the cool demo of the digital master planning software platform. Well, we'll skip it. But we were going to orientate everybody and show how the university is so close, the Obama Center is so close. Okay. All right. Give me 1 second. Actually, because of how this is set up, I'm going to skip it, but we can, okay, we'll stick around at the end because it'll be cool. Yeah. Okay. So here's the breakdown of the project. This is ambitious. It's 1.4 million square feet, 870 residential units, 30% of which at least will be affordable. We're going to have an activated street and retail that is curated. We will have choice of all of the retail partners. So we're going to make sure it's an ecosystem of retail services and restaurants that meet the community's needs and meet all the unmet needs right now, and also try to not be in conflict with other developments that happen in the neighborhood, so we can all thrive together and meet more needs of the community. The plan is for 140 or 150 key hotel. We're going to have a theater with around 200 seats, art gallery, a museum, a digital resource center, which we'll talk about in a minute, co-working and incubation space for both starting companies and tech companies, but also for retailers and pop-ups and restaurants. Overall, right now with the plan, we have a floor area ratio of 2.6, which is very low from a development standpoint, But we're leaving 2 of the parking lots the church has empty for future development. And that would probably bring the FAR closer to 3, but not much over that. So it's not a super dense development, but compared to what's there, because it's all parking lots, it's a lot more. This is something we're always asked. How many jobs are you creating? So the number of jobs here are full-time jobs once the project is built, and does not include the design and construction jobs that will be generated during the process. And I'll have the numbers for those shortly. I should have updated that before I shared the slide. But what's interesting is that we expect most of the folks working in Woodlawn Central to be from Woodlawn Central or the south and west side. We really want to create economic inclusive growth. And we want to be an innovation district. And most of the time when you hear innovation district, it's associated with like a medical innovation district with a university, or the development triangle down in North Carolina, et cetera, et cetera. And I've built a lot of innovation districts. What we want to do is different. We want to have a community innovation district. So we're using innovation across every element of the development to foster community growth and community innovation. It's not just business and industry. And we want to unleash Chicago's potential with our community innovation. So Woodlawn Central is an innovative approach, and I mistakenly use the term urban renewal or urban revitalization. And Jay Byron very quickly corrected me, saying, all of this density was here before. This is regeneration. We are regenerating what the community had, and we're doing it in as thoughtful a way as we can with intentional placekeeping. The commercial developers would call it placemaking. We're calling it placekeeping because we want to retain the culture of the neighborhood and the community. And we want to have a welcoming and connected public realm. We are, above all, a transit-oriented community. And we really think, or actually we know, if we succeed in building this, we will realize a new model for urban regeneration. Let's talk about equitable innovation districts. What we want to do first and foremost is enable new businesses and more jobs. We want to create wealth in the community and for the community. We want the money spent to stay in the community, and we want wealth to grow in the community across all businesses. And we see an opportunity for implementation of innovative ideas. Because we're doing a ground-up development, we can incorporate any idea that is appropriate that helps us achieve our goals. And we're also looking at innovating the development process itself. We're looking at new tools, new ways design is done, construction is done, the workflow that's used, because we're entering into the most difficult time to build since World War II. And we're going to have to take a completely different approach than how design, construction, and development is typically done if we want to build in this most challenging time. We care a lot about digital equity and digital infrastructure. And this is all the fiber and Wi-Fi and cellular to make everything happen. But we also see all of that enabling smart buildings and sustainability, as well as a leaner operations model for the district overall. And it will enable us to lower our OpEx and CapEx once everything is built. But with digital and an innovation district, we care greatly about digital equity. And the Urban Institute was fantastic during COVID, helping to educate the country, and I'm one of those people, about what digital equity is. And First and foremost, digital equity is digital connectivity, having access to high-speed internet or Wi-Fi so kids could attend classes remotely and things like that. Also having the digital tools themselves, the laptops, the smartphones, and the tablets to actually leverage the connectivity, but then also the digital skills to make sure as a result of having those things, you're not phished and you don't get hacked and all of those things, and also learning how to leverage the new tools. And then digital careers. We are going to create a digital resource center that actually provides training for the community on these digital skills, but also the folks who work in that digital resource center will be taking donated laptops and phones and tablets, wiping them clean and putting in a new OS, and thus be learning new trades and helping to become part of the digital economy. And those folks who work there, it can be a stepping stone to IT jobs and things like that in the future. So the master plan right now comprises the different parcels you see on screen. And just to go around clockwise from the top, there's going to be a theater with around 200 seats. There's going to be two venues, one that's on grade and enclosed, but then another outdoor venue on the roof of the theater. And that's going to be right at the level of the metro tracks. So it should be a pretty interesting venue, also with a beautiful view of the skyline. Then there'll be a hotel, a residential building, a podium with retail and parking. We're going to have an urban farm. The church has every Sunday typically 2 services with over between 2,500 and 4,000 people at every service. And then they serve breakfast for most everybody too. And so we see the urban farm providing food for the church, and we're literally building it right across the street from the loading dock of the church. And then as I said before, we're keeping 2 on-grade parking lots to remain for future development. And then we're going to have a combined building that's mostly residential, but we'll have community space and retail on the ground level. And then on this parcel here, that is going to be the primary number of units with 451 with activated street level. And then we also will have senior housing. We're looking at 2 main phases. Phase 1, we're intending to break ground this year with sub-area 1A, and then hopefully in 2026, break ground with phase 1B we're going to break ground 2025 and then 1B in 2026. And then we see phase 2 happening in 2027 through 2028, breaking ground. Phase 1A, to go into a little more detail, we are planning a 150 key hotel. We are talking to multiple different flags, and we're figuring out what is best positioned and the best partner for the community. And then we're going to have a residential building with approximately 94 units. The podium, as you see it now, will be enlarged to include more parking because we have to make up for the parking for the church that's being lost through the project. So we're going to have a major garage as the podium for this building. And it's going to get a lot of use, we hope, because right now the University of Chicago currently has staff and folks parking on the church's lots now, and there's shuttle service back up to the campus. We expect that to continue with the garage. And we also know that the Obama Center will most likely be underparked and will need extra capacity. So we see use for the garage during the week to help our neighbors and the community. And then on the weekends, it'll hopefully be empty on Sundays so the folks from the church can park in there. I think I went the wrong way. Okay. We want to build, as we said, an equitable, oh, did I go backwards? Yes, I did. There we go. Okay, so for some context, my good friend Chris Scrable from the Chicago Studies program helped us do some research here. And on our parcel 1A site, there was a 122-foot building that was built in 1916 and 17, which was the Illinois Central Railroad headquarters building. So this is a super cool building that is no longer in existence. And we're going to have to figure out how to get rid of the beefy foundation that's still underground where this building was. But what's also interesting is that because it was the headquarters for the Illinois Central Railroad, the 63rd Street stop was one of the major destinations of the Great Migration coming north. So there's a lot of historical significance to the site and the location. And we're exploring having Amtrak open a stop there because actually in the 40s through the 60s, obviously interstate and intercity trains used to stop there with the Illinois Central Railroad. But once Amtrak took over in 1971, the stop was shut down. So we see an opportunity to help the community by putting that stop back, but the odds are frankly very long, especially with the current political environment. Phase 1B will also, did I go backwards? Nope. Phase 1B will have mostly residential, but as I said before, community space and retail on the ground. Okay, so let's switch to the challenges and the crisis we're facing. A lot of folks have mixed views of former Mayor Rahm Emanuel, but while he was part of the Obama administration, he was famous for having a quote in the Wall Street Journal, which I'll paraphrase: "You should never let a crisis go to waste. It gives you the opportunity to make changes that before wouldn't be possible." And so optimistically looking at all the challenges we're facing now, we could be in a situation where we can leverage this crisis to the city's advantage and the community's advantage. As I mentioned before, it's the most challenging time to build since World War II. Most all other developers in Chicago that I've talked to have stopped building in Chicago. It doesn't pencil, as they say. Now, there are a lot of reasons. The cost of materials have gone up. The tariffs are circling all the time, and supply chains are threatened as a result. Also, obviously, labor and immigration is a challenge, and 30% of construction labor is immigration labor. And so if one day on your job site, all the guys from Venezuela don't show up, there's a reason, but this impacts schedule and it impacts cost greatly. And also with those challenges come the cost of equity, the return on investment investors wish to see, and also the cost of debt. Both are at historically big highs, and I'll go into that in a little more in a bit. And then also there are just too many checks on the process itself. Whether you look at the plan development process, the zoning process, which is kind of the same, when you look at permitting and inspections and the environmental compliance, there are literally dozens of meetings we have to have and many, just so much data we need to create, which maybe sometimes one person downtown reads, but we spent $30,000 getting that transportation data together, for instance. And I only bring this up because I fully acknowledge we have to have checks and balances on residential development, especially in communities where we're trying to do regeneration, because we do not want to cause displacement. But with that in mind, every additional dollar we spend on any of these checks actually ends up being fewer units we get to build. We're aspiring to build 870 units. Will we be able to? Time will tell, but because of the process we use, it's very expensive. And it's also the barrier to market entry for a lot of folks trying to do this on the south and west side. Politics, policy, and process all require reinvention, and I'm going to share some ideas about that in a moment. And also, we're facing a climate challenge, and unfortunately, this is at the bottom of the list, but it's definitely something we want to aspire to overachieve and create an extraordinarily sustainable and thoughtful design and environment. But there's one other challenge, and that's the culture. And this is something that I don't see talked about, and I don't see mentioned, and I don't see written about. But we have a culture in this city, especially when it comes to real estate development, where people will only help if it helps them. And it's the what's in it for me mentality. And I've seen this ad nauseum now. And I've also seen so much hubris of people who are part of the process, who have airs of, I don't know what to call it, but I've done billions of dollars of projects around the world. Some of the biggest projects, in China, I've worked in like dozens of countries. I've never seen anything as challenging as working in Chicago. It's astounding. And there's a distinct lack of helpfulness. And I find this everywhere I go, but there are a few people who I've run into who are friends in the industry who have been extraordinarily helpful to help me through the process. And one is Brett Charles Taylor, who's at Gensler. He's gone through the PD process so many times. He's been extraordinarily generous with his time and counsel in doing this. And then there are literally dozens more I can mention. My friend Ujval is in the room here, and there are a lot of other people I need to thank for their counsel. But outside of those folks, it's incredibly hard to do this. And if you don't know the answers and you ask questions of what the process is, people don't want to share how it works. And so all of this slows things down and makes people give up. And we can't give up. We cannot fail. And what I'd like to do, and Chris, we can talk about this later, but I'd love to come back in a year and say, okay, here's what we were able to accomplish, and here's what we weren't able to accomplish. And we'll see where it goes. Okay, let's talk about solutions. So one of the biggest challenges is in the real estate industry itself and real estate investors, private equity folks, pension funds, insurance funds, etc. They're all looking for absurd return on investment. And basically in real estate, it's divided into three categories. There's core, which is a safe office building, or used to be a safe office building. And that is a return annually of between 6 and 12% typically. Then there's value add, which is where you're taking, say, a Class B building and updating it to a Class A and putting it back on the market and making more money. And those returns are from 12 to 20%. And then over that is considered opportunistic. And just by default, any ground up development is considered opportunistic. What's interesting is that when you look at building workforce housing, there are lots of studies that show that it is the most stable investment. Why? Because people don't move out. There's very little turnover. When you look at all the apartments in Nashville and Huntsville and Austin, people are moving every year because they can get lower rents and play the buildings off each other. But when you have a constricted supply like we have here and insane demand, once people find a good place to live, they're going to stay there for a while. And we see this as one of the biggest ways to reduce the risk. And also, it becomes a safer place to invest. So what we're seeking is impact investors who are okay with core returns to build this type of housing because it's a really solid, de-risked long-term investment. The other challenge is the concept of risk itself. When you look at feasibility studies for these projects, the deck is stacked against a neighborhood like Woodlawn. Because of the low AMI of the community, because there are no comps, which are comparable projects, you can't show that it's safe to build this. So even if we did a normal feasibility study, it would all point to don't ever build here. And what we want to do is flip the script on this and say, actually, this is the safest place to build because demand so far outstretches supply. So we have a remarkable opportunity here. We'll see if the equity investment community agrees with that. And I keep pressing the wrong button. What? Okay. Number two is financing innovation. So we spent a lot of time, or I spent a lot of time in the last 2 years researching the US Department of Transportation's Build America program. Really awesome. The Federal Rail Authority has the RIF program, and you could get private development could get loans of up to 75% of the cost of their projects. That is unheard of these days. And it had an interest rate of around 4%, which is absurd these days. And there were no payments for the first 5 years. And you had a 40-year term overall. It's that kind of low-cost debt that can enable these projects to happen and thrive. But as soon as the new administration came in, all of these programs were basically stopped in their tracks. Now, the US DOT thinks it's going to continue. The program continued during the last 3 administrations, including the first Trump administration. Is this stuff going to continue to happen? Who knows? And the red line funding for the red line extension, we'll let them fight the fight. We don't have the money or capital or interest in fighting the fight. But this is where we see an opportunity for the state to step in. The state has gone up 9 bond ratings in the last 4 years. They have really changed their ways, and institutional investors have recognized that. So what if instead we build our own program in the state that replicates the Build America program from the US Department of Transportation? This is very similar to what our housing commissioner amazingly did, and her staff member, Edwin Ortiz Reyes. I met Edwin at the symposium on Thursday of last week. They did an amazing thing getting the Build Green program stood up. And that's something that we can also model. But it's that type of low-cost debt that can enable these projects to happen. Another thing is zoning innovation. Everybody in this room, I'm sure, is familiar with single-use zoning. Most people will know that that was enacted in the 1940s by the Chicago Planning Commission to actually enable urban renewal to happen. We still have that same zoning. We have transit-oriented development guidelines from the Department of Planning and Development and the CTA, but we have no transit-oriented development zoning. We have no mixed-use development zoning outside of downtown. And to me, this is the most insane thing ever, because if we had mixed-use TOD zoning by every CTA stop and every metro stop that was in a very tight distance to the station, you could create this density very easily and quickly. And also, because you're there, not as many people will need cars. And so one of the biggest expenses is rezoning or getting zoning to happen or going through the planned development process. If inclusive transit-oriented mixed-use development was zoned and done by right, it would unlock the market to do amazing things. And of course, this development has to be done without displacement. And so there's a balance that needs to be made, but there's a massive opportunity to unlock the market forces to do their own thing. So I just have a few ideas for academic studies to back up these things. One of the things is housing units completed versus attempted. I haven't been able to find any data on this. How many people tried to go through the PD process and gave up? How many people tried to build 2 flats or single family homes and gave up? I think there's a lack of data showing how hard and challenging it is. And if we had that data, it would make a really great case for these changes. The second thing is zoning and entitlement costs. It costs a lot of money to put the case together to do a PD or get zoning changes. A ton of money. I was going to try to get through this without swearing. It's a lot of frickin' money. And if this stuff was by right, it would make a huge difference. And then how can equitable transit-oriented development zoning, like I was just talked about, speed up the creation of resilient and sustainable communities while at the same time lowering the cost per unit? And also, this is a fun fact. So if you go through the planned development process like we are, it costs 50 cents a square foot for the city to review our project. 50 cents. So they're asking a not-for-profit church in one of the lowest AMI communities, where every dollar that's come in came through a collection plate, to pay the city to review the plan. This is just absurd. And we really, really should negate these fees, especially for anything happening in lower AMI communities. Okay, switching to innovation, back to innovation. We need to change the way property taxes are done. So I speak to a lot of investors, especially a lot of folks on the North Shore who never come into the city. And most people and most real estate investors will not invest in the city of Chicago, full stop. There are 2 big reasons for this. The first and most important is property taxes. Every 3 years, your building's reassessed, they jack up the fees, you go to court, you fight them, and then it comes back down. But only deep-pocketed real estate owners can go and fight that fight and get the fees down. What would change everything is if they knew what their property taxes were going to be. If you could lock in the property tax, so when we're done with construction, we'll know exactly how much it costs to build that building. Let's have the value of the building be what it was when we finished building it. And then instead of rolling the dice every 3 years, we agree to it going up 1.5% every year. If we can lock that in, then we'd know if we can make it all pencil. But here's the thing is, why should only the developer get that? It's completely unfair, because then you're actually making displacement even worse. So the idea is that same stabilized tax rate would be for the community around the development too. And with this in mind, if your rents go up, it's because the landlord raised the rent. It's not because the property taxes went up. And by stabilizing and de-risking the property tax, it will theoretically make it safe for institutional investors to jump in. And I know a lot that would, if that complete variable were taken off the equation. Now, I'm going to say one more challenge that I did not put up in the challenges section, but everyone knows downtown, the offices are a lot emptier than they were 5 years ago. What's interesting is that all of those buildings, because of the vacancies, were not collecting the rents during COVID and everything. The city did not lower their property taxes. However, once the new assessments came through this year and last year, all of the property taxes that were paid, the owners, the real estate investors, are going to go to the city and want their money back. And they're going to appeal what they paid because the valuations of their properties have dropped so significantly. So the city could potentially have to write millions of dollars of checks back to the owners of the office towers. We don't have enough income from property taxes elsewhere, and this is where the burden then gets passed on to the residential sector, which Mr. Scribble knows quite a bit about with the papers he's written and how this, I'm sorry, Mr. Barry, Chris Barry, sorry, Chris, knows all about this. So how could stabilized property tax encourage development? That would be a wonderful study to do. And I'm just going to, in the interest of time, just keep going faster. And how could stabilized property tax rates not shift the tax burden to other neighborhoods? I've heard so many people say, we can't stabilize the property tax because that's unfair to other neighborhoods. Well, if it was increasing year on year, we could show, especially with Woodlawn Central, we were not generating any property tax or hotel tax or sales tax or parking tax because it was all empty parking lots. All of this is an upside for the city. And it's examples like this that I think could really make a case for policy change. So I went through this much faster, and I was happy I was able to do this in 41 minutes, it looks like. But I'd like to open it up for any questions. Thank you.
Taxes, you're talking about, are we looking into TIF funds? Because I understand you need TIF funds and also the enterprise zone is a tax credit.
You're 100% correct. So we look at those opportunities as part of our overall cap stack, all the things we can look for money coming in. We definitely think TIF is an option. We are in a TIF zone for the city. Where we would look for the city for help with that is on the street and sidewalk improvements and things that we're doing, and maybe some of the underground stuff. So we see TIF being helpful. We're not quite sure what that's going to be. And then another interesting thing is about, looking at the map, west of Dorchester and south of 63rd, our project where the church itself is and west and south is an opportunity zone. The parcel adjacent to the tracks and north of 63rd is a different census tract and a different zoning, and it's not an opportunity zone. We absolutely see leveraging opportunity zone to get a different set of investors for the buildings down there than we would have in the other areas. So we see lots of opportunities to have a different cap stack and different investors depending on the parcel and whether it's in the OZ or not. Chris. Yeah.
What is the church's motivation in doing this kind of, where did this idea come from? It's pretty novel for a church to be doing this kind of development. And secondly, it wasn't 100% clear to me from the presentation how certain this is. Like, is this a plan? Would this be a cool idea? Versus we've got the money and we're going to start building in a few months. So could you just give us that kind of context?
Sure. Thank you, and thank you.
In our backyard, and it's really, we can practically see.
You'll see it. You'll see it when it's done out that window. Absolutely. So to answer the first question, the church has been in ever since they got their planned development, and this is where maybe I'll end the show here. And that shows that screen. Give me 1 second. Can I move this? Yeah, I will. 1 second. I gotta make it smaller. Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay. So what we're looking at right now, folks, is a model of the church. And this is the original sanctuary, which was built in 1974, that houses around 1,200 worshipers. And then in 2004, the new sanctuary was built, which houses can hold about 2,900 people. So between the two, on Easter, both will be filled twice on a Sunday. And the church, in order to accommodate all those folks, slowly acquired all of the land around the church and built on-grade parking. But the intent was never to just have on-grade parking. And so in 2005, the church received a planned development status for the neighborhood that incorporated all of their parcels. And ever since then, there was the plan to do something for the community like this. And then 2004, the church was finished. 2005, the PD was in place. They started looking at options, and in 2008, we know what happened. And then coming out of that, the church and the network of Woodlawn organization has been having quarterly meetings with the neighborhood. And finally answer your question, Chris, the church is building what the community has come up with collectively. And it's not a developer coming in from the outside saying, here's what we're doing for your community. It's the community developing from within. And the church has a mission to house and make sure people are safe, to help the elderly. And you go to the church's website and all of these things are on there. There's a mission to serve the community. And the desire to do this project comes out of that mission. And because they own the land, it makes such a difference in leveraging the equity of the land to enable the development. So the church has money to enable the pre-development, which is what we're in, and to get through entitlement and zoning. We have lots of interested investors, luckily, and we have lots of interested financing opportunities like the TIF and a grant from the state of Illinois. So will this all happen? We're planning on it happening. Will the market forces stop it from happening? I'll tell you in a year, but every day we're facing new challenges, and we're confident that we can put this together to make it work. But the challenges are immense and heroic to try to make it work. Tiffany.
Questions?
Sure.
Is discussion about, you mentioned the ETOD component.
Yeah.
That train line used to actually run all the way down. It didn't just stop, prior at Cottage Grove, right? Has there been discussion about actually bringing that line all the way out so that it meets your new development? So it's truly an ETOD?
So right now, there is a 63rd Street stop that's still there for Metro. Yeah. The green line? I know. We are not looking at extending the green line as part of this project. What we are looking at doing is updating the 63rd Street Metro stop to make it more appetizing for people to use it for park and ride more, but then also to attract residents so they can just hop on the train and go downtown. But then also, if we could reactivate the 63rd Street stop for Amtrak, for the city of New Orleans, Illini, and Saluki trains, it would make it a lot more convenient for folks on the south side so they don't have to go all the way up to Union Station for their kids to go all the way back down to U of I or SIU.
Is there a component maybe in a later phase for home ownership within the space that the church owns, maybe condos, co-op, or something along those lines?
The answer I'll give you is we want homeownership. And the 870 units, we're not saying they're all rental right now. We don't know what the mix is going to be yet, but we absolutely want to foster wealth. We want the project to generate the wealth for the community members. And it means people live there longer and it becomes more of a community. So we're exploring lease to own. We're exploring basically every scenario you can think of. We're learning about and seeing which ones we can apply. But we think home ownership is crucial. But one thing I'll add to that is when you look at our district, if you zoom out, look at all these empty lots. The phrase Jay Byron uses, which I've adopted too, the block has missing teeth. We want to fill in all the teeth for all of these adjoining blocks. And so we see our project as establishing a community that has retail and meets the needs. And then we see a donut of secondary development that'll happen around it. And that's where I'd love to see the 2 flats and things like that on those city-owned lots and county-owned lots. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes.
I don't have a background in urban planning or development, but I lived in Chicago for a long time. So I'm from Chicago.
Yeah.
When you say you want to attract residents, but you want it to be residents from the community, and who's to say that all the PhDs and postdocs who are now from the University of Chicago who are now living in Pilsen and Bridgeport aren't going to say this is much closer, I want to live there.
Absolutely. I mean,
Sure.
so right now, there are a lot of Chicago students and instructors and staff living in Woodlawn already. In fact, well, I have friends that are students and staff that live near the church or buy Robust coffee and stuff. And so we see it, we're building an inclusive, diverse development. Who comes in and rents and stuff, we'll see. But we want to build a community that is really a regeneration of the community that's already there. And we really see an opportunity by building it that people who already live there can actually stay there too. And that's one of the biggest things we want to make sure happens.
So that was my question. How the people who already live there want to stay there. What?
So the downside is that the valuations go up and their property taxes go up and things like that, or landlords raise the rent. All of that could happen and is obviously out of our control, but we're going to price the units in the development as close to market rate for the neighborhood as we possibly can. And whether or not that'll pencil at the end of the day, time will tell. But we want to have units to match different income levels for sure. And senior housing is one of the biggest ones. We want folks to be able to age in the community. And so how the units are priced, we're going to do everything we can to make it possible for folks from the neighborhood to move in. Does that answer your question?
Because
Yeah.
Lunches, and so I came to one.
Yeah.
It's senior housing and,
Yeah.
and the complications of zoning and
It's insane.
So that seniors.
This is where we're going to have to be really damn good at designing construction and being able to build more with less money. And so this is where current prices, like if you look at what HUD has paid or some of these other not-for-profits have paid for recently completed projects where it's 800,000 a unit or 900,000 a unit, we can't do that. We need numbers that are 400 or less. And I would like to see it much less. So it's going to be a question of how we can work with the construction community. And this is, so has everyone heard of the doom loop with city downtowns? Okay, so there's this theory of the doom loop, especially with San Francisco as the archetypal example, where The offices empty out. There's not enough foot traffic to support retail. The retail dies, the offices, die basically. But the bottom line is all the property taxes and sales tax that the downtown was generating disappears. And then the city can't supply services, and it's just this downward spiral. And it's referred to as a doom loop. I feel we've already crossed over to the doom loop for construction. I drove down here, there are no cranes downtown at all. No one's building like they used to. And because we're not building, we're going to lose the institutional knowledge of how to build. Our concrete union workers in the city are literally the best in the entire world. And they can do a floor every 5 days. No other city can do this. If we're not building enough to keep those guys busy, we're going to lose that skill. And it's the same thing with electricians and carpenters. We're in no way, shape, or form anti anything. We want to build as much as we can everywhere so we can actually build our way out of the challenges we're in. And so I see the biggest opportunity here is, instead of fighting over what little scraps of projects there are, why don't we just have tons more projects to meet the unmet needs, and then people can have work too.
Church community owns this area that's inside the yellow,
Yep,
but they don't have any say over who moves in.
don't have any say
They
over.
don't say gets those units, gets those reasons. Whether they want it to be community members, but they can't make it that way.
It's going to, I mean, they're private developments. So there is some selection that, I mean, for instance, the church is going to want to extend an offer to church members if they can. But outside of that, I mean, it's going to be an open market economy.
That's my understanding.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say on that, like, so I've worked around trying to covenant like different things for different
Yeah.
classes of people. You can do seniors, but fair housing law gets a little murky when it comes to offering preference for units, because you basically have to prove in a court of law that those people that you're offering to are representative of the larger population that could access those units too. So just some of the challenges, I've tried to work through this type of stuff too, some of the challenges associated with that, or with fair housing law. But I had a question just about the affordability and like how you think about, you mentioned workforce housing, trying to keep the overall units at like a workforce level for the community, but then also there's 30% allocation. How do you think about how that gets changed potentially if the project's financing is affected? And then is there any types of financing that you can get access to by allocating that level of affordability? Because my understanding is this wouldn't be in the city's ARO, right? So you don't have to put 20% affordable if you don't want to.
Great question. So the phrase we like is NOAA, naturally occurring affordable housing. Are we going to be able to achieve that? We don't know yet. We think we can, but we have obligations to the community to make it possible for folks in the community to live in what we build. So we're going, I can't say what the numbers are going to be. We can't say what the percentages of the different unit types are, but I can say we are absolutely striving to have a diverse selection of housing types that meet unmet needs. So senior housing, we want to have artist housing where artists can live workspace, and we want to have workplace housing, and we want to have, one of the things we're looking at is the hotel. But what if the hotel doesn't work? What if there isn't a demand? Well, that could be student housing overnight, and it would be great student housing, probably. So there are lots of options, and we have to keep every option on the table.
I noticed you had 2 phases.
Yeah.
Can you explain some of the strategy? Because as you're saying, those 2 phases have so many different kinds of property types.
Yep.
why is there not 8 phases that are done in bite-sized pieces? Rather than, oh, the first phase is gonna be a hotel, student housing, elderly housing, et cetera.
Great question. So with that phase 1A building, we can build that podium with the retail and parking very quickly. Once we sort out that whatever foundation is underneath, we'll have to work around. But we can build that podium very quickly. And then with the standardized floor plates, we think we'll be able to go up very quickly. We're also exploring modular, and that could go really quickly. So we're open to anything. These are not heroic, artistic, complicated buildings we're trying to build. We're trying to build really efficient buildings that we can build quickly and inexpensively, but still at a high quality. And so thank you. But we're we should be able to do this. And then, yes, we could do more bite-sized things, but we also know that we don't want it to be a construction site for a decade. We want it to be a construction site for the smallest amount of time possible. And so we're trying to compress that. And the less time we take, the less financing costs there are, the less construction insurance costs, all the costs get lower the faster we can go. But the speed is completely dependent upon having the cash to build. Yes.
What is the estimated cost of the project, and how much do you think the taxpayer is gonna be paying in the form of subsidies, grants? And what percentage of the cost is gonna be covered by the taxpayer?
Give me a second to do some math. So we expect the construction costs to be between $500 million and $1 billion. Somewhere around $750 million. Now, the amount of tax revenue generated by the project between property tax, because there's no property tax being collected at all on any of this land, we'll be generating significant property tax. There's no sales tax being generated. We're going to generate a lot of sales tax because we'll have retail and restaurants and services. And then there's no hotel tax. We'll be paying hotel tax. And then parking. We're going to have to pay parking tax for the garage and stuff. So what would be our dream is that we don't take any money from anybody and we do naturally occurring affordable housing. Now, are we going to be able to do that? Don't know. But what is interesting is that we are in a TIF zone and we can make a really good case for using TIF for streets and street improvements and things like that. And then also the state of Illinois is very interested in encouraging projects like ours to happen. And so there is an opportunity there to receive grant funding, but overall, I don't think the tax, if it came from taxes, I would say maybe 5%, maybe, I don't know. Time will tell. And the other thing is the city is trying to get away from doing TIF. So we may not get any TIF. So I'm sorry, I can't answer your question because there are so many variables, but we're trying to do this in the private sector. And we're trying to avoid LIHTC, low income housing tax credits. We're trying to avoid LISC. We're trying to avoid these normal paths because it ends up costing the projects more and we end up building less homes for the same amount of money. So we're trying to do this in a private sector oriented way. Yes. Oh, wait, you've already asked. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I do teach urban planning here, and I teach my students TOD.
Yeah.
And this is like a textbook TOD.
Yeah.
Except for all the parking.
Yeah.
If I were a planner and I was following my TOD playbook, I would not approve this proposal because it's not TOD if it has like dozens or even hundreds of parking spots.
Hundreds.
Yeah. And so I'm just wondering, like, what's your response to
Sure.
that planner gonna be?
Do you want to know the count of parking that's there now?
No, probably I don't, actually.
You do, you do. You absolutely do. There's something like 820 parking spots, right? Right? But that's because everybody drives to the church. So we have to do this in a way that balances all of the needs. And this is why, like, the garage being used by the Obama Center and by the university and by Park and Ride really is a good use of the garage 7 days a week. And we see people driving here a lot from the south, from south and west, because there isn't anything else around. And we want to be a destination, but there isn't public transportation to us to accommodate people coming to us. And so we need the parking to accommodate people coming to us. So it's their fault, not ours. No.
Well, not even, but like, I mean, the metro, the level of service on the metro
Yeah.
is not really up to.
No.
what you would consider.
And this, in fact, it used to be a flag stop where only if you told the conductor would they even stop, right? So there is a huge opportunity to leverage this existing infrastructure and really make something happen. And I really think that, you know, when you look at the bus routes as well, there's room for improvement. But the cool thing too is the University of Chicago transit comes through here for students and folks too. So there's a lot of micromobility and other solutions to help address this. So overall, we're significantly reducing the number of parking spots, and we're consolidating it in the most efficient way possible to enable more housing to be built. So I think that should tick your box. Hopefully, we can debate it more though, if you want. Yeah.
Theater was next to the train tracks, like, if there's one there to increase, like, train, like, why did you laugh?
Because I laughed because I have a background in theater design and acoustics as well. So putting a theater next to trains going by is stupid in many, many ways. Because there are so few trains that go by, it'll actually be cool. So, well, Metro's not gonna, no, we want to increase ridership. We don't necessarily want to increase the volume of trains coming by. We want to increase the use of the trains that come by. And so it's also a very cool venue because, you know, think of being a performing musician and a train full of people come by as you're playing. It's kind of an absurdly cool venue, in my opinion. And if people are dancing or doing ballet, it's going to be a beautiful venue with the city skyline as a backdrop. The juxtapositions make me smile when there are just so many cool things that are going to happen as a result. That's why I smile when I think about it. Any other questions? Tiffany? Yeah.
Question. So I was very pleased to see in your design concept, the green roofs. Can you talk to us more about the approach from a sustainability or green perspective in building design and the materials you're choosing?
Absolutely. So, I used to work for a firm called Arup, which is one of the global leaders in sustainability. And I've done dozens of large scale developments like this and sat with my colleagues who are district energy folks, who are sustainability folks, who are water engineering folks. All of those best practices are just indoctrinated into me now. And so we are going to take a different approach to sustainability. And I don't want to be held to this, but when you look at the checklist, the sustainability checklist, we'd love to check everything on there. It's going to be a matter of what financially pencils. And we have to strike this balance between building as many homes as we can and doing right by the environment and the birds that are flying around. So it's a delicate balance and it's a challenge, but we're gonna know very early on in the design how much glass we're gonna have on these buildings. So we can go to the glass manufacturers and say, hey, we want the bird-proof glass for the same price as the normal glass. We're gonna try things like that everywhere we can and leverage the economies of scale of the project to the project's advantage, but also to do more with sustainability. So think about, we have 870 units and 150 hotel rooms. Think about all of those kitchens and all of those bathrooms. If we go up to Kohler, Wisconsin and say, hey, we're your friends down here, help us help you. We'll lock in your manufacturing and your supply chain so you know you'll be sending this many toilets and this many of this faucet to us, and we'll lock in pricing with them, and they'll lock in their manufacturing runs with us. And it can be a mutually beneficial thing where we get slightly better pricing, but we lock in our supply chain, and we can pick the stuff that's the low flow faucets and the things like that for the same cost as the normal one, or something like that. So we're looking at creative solutions to leverage the economies of scale of the project to help us be more sustainable. We're not running away from it, and we're not going to fake it. We're going to do everything we can within our means. Yeah.
Hi, Christian Gowan, CEO of Tech Exchange and Broker. To your point, I'd like to help you with sourcing materials for the project if you intend to keep it at a low cost that's affordable for the working class. But relative to the project, I have 16 going on 17 years in construction, particularly commercial and industrial development. Don't let the suit pull you. My hands still have burn. We still go out on job sites every week. I'm interested a little more in hearing about this talk with Amtrak. I'm a frequent Amtrak traveler. I go back and forth between Texas and Chicago, so I want to hear what sort of conversation that you've had.
So what we're doing is building a case. And what that case is the historical precedence of the site in the 63rd Street site as part of the Great Migration. We also know the site used to be active. What we're striving to do is to make a case to do it. The actual stairs are there. Everything's there to restore it. Actually, we just need to build it one more platform. What would it cost? I don't know. What's Amtrak's appetite right now? Horrible. Because right now they're just fighting to stay alive with the change in administration. So we would be very, very low on their list. However, the state of Illinois subsidizes the Illini and Saluki lines that go along that path. And most of the users, or a ton of the ridership, is kids going to universities and either coming from downstate up here or coming from here and going downstate. SIU's on the path, U of I's on the path, Eastern's on the path, ISU's on the path. And so it really is a benefit to our state that they're subsidizing the line and that it's used. So the current angle is Amtrak, probably not open to talking to us right now. The state, there is an opportunity there, but still not right now. They have to make sure they get their money for the red line first and things like that. So we see it as an opportunity, and what we're trying to do is socialize it and get feedback about it and build the case for it. And as part of our transportation planning and transportation research that we have to do as a PD, we're going to get ridership information and things like that. So we can go to the next level and do a FOIA and find out what's the ridership on the Illini, Saluki, and City of New Orleans lines. So there's a lot of opportunity, but we have bigger fish to fry right now this year and getting entitlement and breaking ground. But we're not going to give up on it. And it's a thing that once we break ground and once we have momentum, it'll help make our case. And I think the state will be very open to it. Amtrak nationally, they have so many challenges that they'll be like, well, if the state pays for it, we'll do it. I could see that being the case. So time will tell, but I'm a fan of rail too. I'd love to see it happen. It would be very cool.
Ready. That's helpful.
Fantastic. Let's connect after this. So I know we've gone way over time. I'd like to thank all of you for staying this long. I'm happy to, exchange contact information and talk with anybody and also anyone online. Hi. And we'll follow up. So thank you all. And Chris,
Take you up on your offer to come back in a year from now or whenever the time is right to tell us, or maybe we'll see from out our window.
I'll wave to you and present from over there. Okay, thank you.